Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back. We've got a great discussion tonight. There was a Wall Street Journal article citing a study saying that cutting federal unemployment benefits early helped to ease the percentage of unemployment. It induced people to return to work faster. On the other hand, there was at the same time, a New York Times article about the same topic and is actually saying the opposite, that despite the early cutoff of federal benefits, it didn't really help workers uh, to be motivated to get back faster. At least that's their take on the data. So you've got the Wall Street Journal saying one thing, you've got the New York Times saying another, and they're both kind of looking at the same data. And so you have to wonder what's going on. What's the contradiction? How what do we make out of this, right? Well, that's what I'm here to do. I want to help you understand what the underlying data really says without the spin, without the political slant that often happens in this type of news. And you can see this is actually a perfect example of why I created this channel, because one might make the case that the Wall Street Journal does tend uh, somewhat to the right, and the New York Times is regarded as a little bit more liberal. Of course, both these articles are citing studies, and still there's still differences in interpretation, and focusing on different types of data. So that's what we're going to discuss today, right? So this is a live stream, so there's not going to be time codes, but I'm going to put these banners up as we discuss the various topics so that you can skip to the particular topic that is of interest to you. So what we're going to discuss first is, about the Wall Street Journal study, talking about cancellation of benefits. Next, we're going to move on to the New York Times article saying the opposite, right? I'm going to explain how we go about resolving the apparent contradiction. And then finally, as an economist, I would like to help you understand the proper context to understand this data, because both these articles have their flaws, right? And if we pay attention to not only what they're trying to say, but the limitations of the studies, then we can start to understand what's really happening. So those are the four topics that we'll discuss today. And so, like I said, the first thing that we're going to discuss is the Wall Street Journal study. Now, I don't have access to that particular article. I will have access to Wall Street Journal soon, but Insider did a very good article summing up the main points of that. So we're going to go ahead and look at that. So let me call that up on the screen. Um, uh, okay, let me. Okay. So, like I said, Insider has a summary of the Wall Street Journal article. And let's start with the point that, as it says here, the number of Americans receiving unemployment benefits is declining at a faster rate in Missouri and 20 other U.S. states that opted out of receiving enhanced federal payments this month, according to the Wall Street Journal. Right. So this is in some ways a nice economic study, excuse me, being done in terms of what are the impacts of cutting off the benefits early. And the article talks about how there was some frustration among businesses saying, these federal subsidies are really preventing, workers from coming back. And so the governor of Missouri decided to cut off enhanced federal unemployment benefits in the tune of $300 per month. And so the point that the Wall Street Journal article makes with regarding the impact is really right here. It's saying in May, the Missouri's unemployment rate was 4.2%, which is below the national average of 5.8%, according to data from the Department of Labor, right? And so Missouri ended enhanced federal benefits for unemployed state residents as of June 12th, making it one of the first states to take action, right? So they're saying, you know, they ended the benefits on June 12th. And of course, May comes before June. But I think the implication is that because people knew that June 12th, the extra benefits are going to go away, that they were perhaps more motivated to start searching for work before the June 12th deadline. And that's why, excuse me, the Missouri's unemployment rate was 4.2%, which is, again, below the national average of 5.8%, right? And there is further a quote from the article. So this is a quote from, I'm going to butcher the name, so I'm just going to say Jefferies' chief financial economist, right? I think Jefferies is the firm that actually conducted this study. And the quote from her is basically saying, you're starting to see a response to these programs ending. And adding that employers were having to compete with the government, handing out money, and that makes it very hard to attract workers, right? Now, her statement is based on the data that she saw in her study. There are other economists who would take issue with this, right? But this is her summing up her assessment of the data, and that's fair, right? I'm not suggesting any nefarious thing, but we will get into some of the issues with the study that was noted in another article, right? So again, the overall contention is we did a study of Missouri, and they made it clear to the residents that the enhanced unemployment benefit is going to cut off at June 12th, and therefore it had a motivating effect even before the deadline for workers to return to work. And that's why, as you saw, Missouri's unemployment rate was below the national average. That is their contention, right? It's not really being debated among economic circles that the unemployment benefits had no impact on the workforce. Obviously, it did. What is being really debated is how much of an impact. And people right now are seeing some data come in, and we are all trying to read the tea leaves and figure out what exactly is happening, right? But even in the same article, it should be noted that they're talking about the struggles of individual people, right? And so they interviewed this lady, Robertson, who told the journal that yes, well, basically, here's her statement. I don't want to speak for her, but the quote is, "It's not that I don't want to go back to work," she said, "but if I took a minimum wage job, I'd be working for health insurance and childcare and have nothing to live on." Now, the reason why I also highlight this quote in addition to the quote from the financial economist is because I'm going to refer to both of these points in helping us to understand exactly what's going on, right? So overall, I think, we get the point of contention or what is being stated by the Wall Street Journal study, and saying we looked at the data and it appears that cutting off benefits early is effective, right? And so that's their point of view. And like I said, at the same time, the New York Times came out with a separate article saying we looked at Missouri and their unemployment data, and we found the opposite. And isn't this something that happens all the time in the mass media, right? And this is, one of the reasons why I wanted to create this channel, because there's this kind of conflicting signals and conflicting statements and interpretations. For example, a lot of times people will read an article saying, this is the worst time to buy a house because prices are out of control, and they'll then read another article saying this is the best time to buy a house because prices are going up so fast. So what do you make of this? How do you, thread the needle in trying to understand what's really happening, right? And so this is what this channel is designed to do, right? And so, like I said, the New York Times put, an opposite article. So let's take a brief look at that in terms of the points that they're making, and then we'll start, resolving the contradictions and whatnot. So, so let me bring that up. And so I'm gonna bring it to strange. Okay, so I realize the banner is covering some of the quotations, so I'm gonna also read that. But the New York Times article is titled, "Where Jobless Benefits Were Cut, Jobs Are Still Hard to Find. Missouri Scrapped Federal Pay to the Unemployed, saying it kept people out of the market, out of the labor market. But so far, workers still seem to be choosy," right? And I think the word choosy is actually, related to the quote from Mrs. Robertson. But we'll get into that later as we dig into the actual economic data and start to understand, the things that are really happening. Okay, so the key quotes from the New York Times article is that here business owners had complained that the assistance, as Governor Mike Parson put it, incentivized people to stay out of the workforce. He made Missouri one of the first 4 states to halt the federal aid. A total of 26 have said they will do so by next month. But in the St. Louis metropolitan area, where the jobless rate was 4.2% in May, those who expected the June 12th termination would unleash a flood of job seekers, or those who expected that there would be a flood of job seekers, were in fact disappointed. Workforce development officials said they had seen virtually no uptick in applications since the governor's announcement, which ended a $300 weekly supplement to other benefits. And the online job site Indeed found that in states that have abandoned the federal benefits, clicks on job postings were actually below the national average, right? So the implication there is, when they looked at other sources of data, and they're actually quoting in this article not only the governor, but sorry for all the clicking. Not only the governor, but when they interviewed the workforce development officials, I think they're talking about local city officials and whatnot, that they are not seeing a huge uptick in applications, right? And the same thing goes for the job site Indeed, where clicks on job postings are below the national average. And so that's where the contradiction lies in. Okay, I mean, they're both articles are quoting the 4.2% unemployment rate in May, but different people and different data sources are giving conflicting signals. And I'll tell you the truth, this is actually not atypical for economists to encounter in the data. We're often seeing different sources of data saying different things, and it's up to us to kind of manage the proper interpretation. So let's go on with more from the article. Okay, and so there's a lot of talk about why this is happening. Sorry, I love to do this clicky rolly thing. I'll try to stop. But anyway, so this article does make a good point, which is it lays out the inherent contradiction in our economy right now, where we have, over 9 million people who are unemployed, and yet, we're not having a whole bunch of people, according to some sources, we're not having whole lot of people apply for jobs. How can that be? When millions are out of work, what is preventing them to, coming back from the workforce, right? And the contention of the Wall Street Journal study is that it's actually the enhanced federal unemployment benefits, right? It's probably having some effect, no doubt about it, right? So that's what we need to resolve. And going on further into the article, right? I'm simply summarizing the points that are being made here, but there I go with the clicky thing. We can start to tease out some of the things that are happening with the problems of people being unemployed and yet not wanting to return to the workforce. And there is a quote from an economist at Cornell University. Now, by the way, I think I mentioned in one of the previous videos, but I have an economics degree from Cornell University. So this particular quote caught my eye, for obvious reasons, gave me fond memories of my alma mater. But anyways, the quotation that she gives is that the labor market's deeper problem is the proliferation of low-paid jobs with few prospects for advancement and too little income to cover essential expenses like housing, food, and healthcare, right? So we have here between these two articles, two different points of contention about the cause of why there is such high unemployment, over 9 million people out of work, and yet many businesses are feeling like they're not having enough applicants or qualified people to fill those jobs, right? What is the obstacle? What is the causal factor? The Wall Street Journal article is saying is primarily the extended unemployment benefits. The economist from Cornell University is saying there's a structural problem within the economy right now where a lot of these jobs are paying such a low wage that it's not enough. It's not enough to cover housing, food, child care, health coverage, and in the Wall Street Journal article, you see this quote saying, "It's not that I don't want to go back to work," Ms. Robertson said, "but if I took a minimum wage job, I'd be working for health insurance and childcare and nothing to live on." Okay, so I think we're starting to see some of the dimensions of this problem, right? It's not really so much an either or situation. We are likely seeing, both of these factors being mentioned as part of the problem or part of the article of why there is such a contradiction of high employment and insufficient people applying for jobs, right? There is a great realignment in the labor force. I talked about that in my previous live stream about the actual definition and my assessment of quote unquote labor shortage, right? So in that article, I mentioned that there's a chart, a graph that I wanted to show you. I didn't have it available at the time, but I'm going to show you that now because first, let's put a little bit of context to this statement from Dr. Francine DeBlau. I hope I'm saying that properly, the economist at Cornell University, and try to understand what point that she's actually making. And then we'll go back and discuss certain points about the Wall Street Journal article. But first, let me show you this this chart. Okay. And I contend that this is one of the most important charts that we can examine in trying to understand what's happening with the labor force and the U.S. economy and real wages, not just right now, but for a long time, for decades actually, right? And there's something about this chart that is really key to understand that provides a really a great insight into what's happening, right? So let's take a look at this chart. And it is a graph of median wage by educational attainment, and it is adjusted for 2019 dollars, meaning inflation adjusted to 2019, right? And when we're talking about educational attainment, we are simply talking about the amount of formal education and or degrees that a person has, and how they have fared. Excuse me. Yeah, because I changed the banner because this is about how to resolve the contradiction. And that's exactly what we're getting into right now, right? So this chart is about what happens to you at varying degrees of educational levels in terms of the real wages that you're able to earn in this economy. And that goes back to you know, a little bit before 1980s, right? Now, when you look at this chart, it's divided by people with no high school diploma, some college, bachelor's degree, and advanced degree. So there's a lot that we could say about, you know, this chart, but the thing that I want to highlight is the difference in your life between somebody with an advanced degree and a bachelor's degree versus somebody with some college and even less, you know, attainment in formal education, right? When you look at the bottom three lines right here, right? Take, for example, some college, right? Sometime before 1980s, you earned an average, you know, inflation adjusted $22.86, and in 2019 you earned $20, right? Now let's think about what that means, right? This chart is already adjusted for inflation, so we don't have to worry about that, right? This means that a person who had worked right prior to 1980, you know, no matter what actual dollars that you were paid, the chances are you actually had your real income go down steadily for decades, right? And let's look at some of what's happened with some of the individuals with even less, you know, formal education. So if you had a high school diploma, you were paid almost $20, you know, here, and now you're being paid $17.14. If you had no high school diploma, you started at 17 and you're now down to let's call it, you know, about almost $15, right? So let's talk about what this is telling us. Number one, unless you had a bachelor's degree or above, and I'm sure that, I guess that's one of the message from this, you know, from this chart, is that folks, stay in school. Kids, stay in school. Seriously, if you want your life to be on an upward path, you need a degree, right? This chart makes it abundantly clear. But for the purpose of our discussion, you know, yeah, you needed it. If you had a bachelor's degree and an advanced degree, you know, over the past few decades, you did all right. Not great, you know, No one's becoming a millionaire based on these salary rates, but at least you experienced an upward trend. But for people who don't have a bachelor's degree and have formal education levels below that, all you experienced for the last few decades is just a downward slope, right? And if you recall the comments that the Cornell economist made, okay, we can start connecting the dots to what's happening with our current labor situation, right? And start to resolve the contradictions and why both unemployment is above 9 million workers, and people are and businesses are having high frustration in terms of trying to get skilled workers. So let's draw it back to what she is saying, Dr. Blau, and she's talking about the labor market's deeper problem, which is the proliferation of low-paid jobs. Oh, sorry, let me bring that up and enlarge the screen. Is the proliferation of low-paid jobs with few prospects for advancement and too little income to cover essential expenses like housing, food, and healthcare. And when you bring it back down to this quotation that we're seeing, right? Where she said, it's not that I don't want to go back to work, but the minimum wage job that she's being offered. And when she's talking about that, we see this right here. I don't know her level of education, but I'm guessing that it's somewhere along this the three lines that are downward trending, right? I don't know that for sure, but I'm guessing that's likely, right? If she's talking about earning a minimum wage, because people with bachelor's degree and advanced degrees and PhDs they're not earning minimum wage, okay? She's likely lying somewhere down in these charts, possibly if you're discussing minimum wage, it's likely that she might not even have any college education, right? And we have, all of the real wage that she might be earning over the last 7 years is just on a downward trend, and she's feeling squeezed. You can see this in the quote that she has. What am I supposed to do, right? If you're in her position, what would you do? You could go back to work, right? And make a living, but then you have childcare expenses. Who's going to take care of your kid? They may still be doing online learning because of the pandemic, right? And even if they are going to school, then what about healthcare? What about rent? I doubt she's a homeowner. What about all the rising costs? Because in my first episode, I talked about the inflation spike, right? I made note that yes, it's not hyperinflation, but there is a temporary increase in food prices and other commodity goods and services, and I fully expect that, like most economists, that the price pressures will ease, but right now it's hard for a lot of people, right? And I think the action that the unemployment benefits have done is, yes, in a sense, it has allowed workers more time to reassess their situation, and says, I suppose in that sense, you could say, yes, it has lessened the urgency with which some workers would have been forced to return to work. But you see how both of these factors could be acting in concert with each other, right? There is a structural problem, and there is a business cycle problem that's happening, right now in the labor market. So let me. So we're talking about now the proper context to understand the contradiction in the data, right? it's not hard to imagine there are multiple factors that are operating in the labor market right now because we just came out of lockdown. There's a pandemic going on. I think it's common sense to say it's complicated, right? And this channel is about helping you to or helping us tease out the varying factors and understanding how they're working together to create the current situation. So what I'm saying right now is that federal unemployment benefits likely do have an impact, right? We still need to understand what's happening there, but there's also a structural problem that we cannot ignore, right? Let's go back to the chart again, because I think this is a great chart to keep in mind when we talk about motivation for jobs. What is your motivation to go back to to work again when all your life you have simply experienced a continual decrease in your actual purchasing power? Look at this. In all three of these lines, you're getting paid less and less, right? And so if that has been your life and you're struggling to provide healthcare for your kids, and this is a story that's repeated by with millions of people, working class people across this country, right? Now, I want to be clear. This is not a political statement. This is mathematics, okay? I know people can interpret what I'm saying differently, but as an economist, I'm simply pointing out that real wages for people at certain levels of formal education have gone down for decades, okay? That is a structural problem that we have in the labor market, right? And it's a problem. It's definitely a problem. If millions of people out there are taking jobs that can't pay for all their expenses, all their necessities, right? That's a problem for the whole economy, right? Because that's actually going to put pressure on government to increase benefits, as we saw during this pandemic. Well, the pandemic is a massive spike, which is a special circumstances. But even considering the regular unemployment benefits and social benefits, right? So, in a certain sense, businesses are not paying enough. And again, this is not a political statement. I'm just talking math here, right? And so, some people are having to turn to the government for social subsidies, and that's clearly a problem for society, right? So we're taking a policy point of view about all of this, right? Now, so the way to understand what's happening right now with unemployment benefits is that the pandemic has exposed underlying deeper problems with the labor market that has been going on for decades, right? People are worried about going back to work because of the health and safety issues, the social distancing, arguments about mask policies and all that, right? We talked about the risk reward calculation that workers are doing right now in their heads in my previous live stream, And so before we go on to some concluding remarks, though, I want to talk about, or let's take another look at the Wall Street Journal article, because there are some criticisms that I think are valid, and that criticism will be the final point that I want to make about this topic, okay? So there's an article on Mishtalk, and he has his own particular slant, but this guy is pretty knowledgeable about finance, and sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't, but I think this article points out some serious flaws in the Wall Street Journal study that I, as an academic economist, need to point out, right? If I had seen these kind of flaws in a study, it would not have been, I mean, it would have been rejected for publication or anything of that sort, right? So keep in mind that he has his own spin on things. Let's take a look at this article, and then we'll tease out, the nonpartisan message out of what he's saying. Okay. So let's explore the claim that Republican states ending benefits early has improved unemployment rates, right? And I'm not going to get deep into what he's talking about, but let's just jump right into the two main things that he points out are problematic about the Wall Street Journal study. So the first thing is regarding seasonal adjustments with regards to chart, right? And so he's really talking about this chart. And again, we're not going to go into all the little details about it. But he points out a mistake. Well, sorry, it's actually this chart. So this chart shows unemployment rate of US versus Missouri, right? And let me see. So the gray chart is the national trend, and Missouri is the state trend. And so when you look at this chart, it looks like Missouri has, sorry again for the clicking, but has experienced a lower unemployment rates, due to the things that they've been doing. And I think the Wall Street Journal study is attributing some of this lower rate to the fact that enhanced federal benefits were shut off early. But this article points out that this chart has a serious problem. Okay. This chart is comparing the U.S. national trend with the state trend, and it's pointing out that the national trend is seasonally adjusted and the state trend is not. Now, let's talk about what that means. Okay. Seasonal adjustments are when you're talking about things like unemployment and job growth rates and all that stuff. One example would be during Christmas time, right? We know that a lot of workers are hired on a temporary basis because they need gift wrappers and I don't know what else, or temporary warehouse workers or whatnot, because there's a surge in demand during Christmas, for shipping and all that. And so when we see, I'm talking about economists see a surge in employment prior to the Christmas season, we know those are temporary hires. So we make an adjustment to the data saying, this is temporary. So we're going to do a little haircut off the top and saying, because they're not permanent jobs, right? We're going to adjust those percentages that spike downward to the previous long-term trend and say that is the actual amount of long-term employment, in the data, right? That's kind of how seasonal adjustments work, right? And it's tricky. It's a difficult adjustment to make based on the data, and some of it is a little bit of a judgment call. But in this article, it points out that you're mixing data that is seasonally adjusted versus non-seasonally adjusted. That's a big no-no in charting, for economists, right? Most economists will not make that mistake. And this article is saying, well, the Wall Street Journal, wouldn't do that. So that's one thing to note, but it's not exactly a nitpick. It's actually a big point. but there's an even larger point that's happening right now with that study. So, you know, the overall point that this article makes with regards to its criticism of the Wall Street Journal article, and let me blow up the screen here for you, is that is the Wall Street Journal article wrong? No, the Wall Street Journal used the wrong chart. Unemployment data is only as of May. The early cutoff was June 12th. Actual unemployment results might start showing up with the June report that comes out Friday, July 2nd. And notice he said might, right? It says might start. In the Wall Street Journal article, or in that study, I think the contention was that because people know that the cutoff is June 12th, they're going to act early, right? But this article is making the valid point that, you know, whether they reacted early or whether they waited until after the deadline, we don't really know because the data isn't there yet, right? We don't have the data to start making that assessment right now, right? And so when it comes to not only Missouri, but all the other states that are cutting off, you know, unemployment benefits early, the data from those states might not show up until September 3rd, right? That's when we might see the full impact of what happens when we, have an earlier date to the the enhanced federal benefits. Okay. And even though the whole question of seasonal adjustments remain, as the quote says here, let me bring that up a bit more. You know, we simply don't know yet, right? So let's start summing up exactly what's happening here, okay? We started with an article talking about, you know, these programs ending, and the impact is going to be felt relatively soon, right? Now, I think that's a reasonable statement, right? We don't know from the data, you know, how much of an impact or how soon it's going to take hold, right? But to say that, you know, reduction in government unemployment benefits will have an influence on worker motivation is not a controversial statement, right? On the other hand, we have an overall assessment from Dr. Blau, sorry, I'm butchering the name. My fellow alumni from Cornell University, you know, saying, well, there's a deeper structural problem to the labor market, which is, you know, the chart that I showed you before, which is the long-term downward spiral of real wages for people with more limited formal education levels, right? So in understanding the contradictions between those two articles, right, it's not so much as a contradiction as the fact that they are pointing to different factors that are operating in the labor market right now, right? The impact of the federal unemployment benefits and them ending in the near future is it's a time-based impact, right? It's an instance in time that is still substantial. The New York Times article is pointing to the fact that there is a structural problem in the labor market with regards to low wages low wage jobs not providing enough income to cover basic living costs and the dilemma that's faced by workers, right? So could we believe that instead of a contradiction, that both factors are in play in the labor market right now? Of course we could, right? When you work through all the little implication details, you realize actually, you know what? That's probably the most likely outcome right now, right? There are multiple challenges being faced by both workers and businesses, right? And like I said in the previous live stream, there is a great reassessment that is happening among millions of people who are looking to return work because their situation is down here. Those three lines, right? Where they have been faced with, what am I doing? These three lines, there are millions of people out there who are living these three lines of declining real wages, right? And so they're making an assessment that, is it worthwhile to go back to the workforce? So let's not talk about laziness. Let's not talk about the greed of businesses and putting workers at risk. That might be happening at particular businesses, but overall, this realignment, this large-scale reassessment is causing difficulties and challenges for everybody, right? How do we solve the problem of low wages where people are forced to make a choice between taking care of their kids at home versus earning a living? If you've never faced that challenge yourself, I think at least you can understand that intellectually and saying that would be agonizing choice to make as a parent, right? And then there's businesses out there saying we are taking billions of taxpayer dollars and you are subsidizing the living of millions of workers out there, and I can't hire anybody. You're taking the money out of my pocket to give to workers who won't apply for jobs when I want to hire them and pay them something, right? But my suspicion is many of the businesses that are having hiring challenges are likely looking to fill low-wage jobs. In fact, there were other quotations in the New York Times article that made mention of similar situations. There were anecdotal stories about workers who are saying, look, it's just not worth it for me here. Previously I was paid $14, $15 an hour. You guys are offering me $11 an hour. It's barely enough to live on. I don't know why I'm here, right? So that's the complex of factors that are operating right now in the labor market, right? And I think, the overall summary point is that the pandemic has stripped away and highlighted the actual structural problems that we have with regards to decades of low wages. And now people are being squeezed by a temporary spike in prices, and they're wondering what to do, right? Everybody's frustrated on both sides. It's a problem. So what we need to do is have a little patience, right? In assessing the actual impact of unemployment benefits and when they're cut off, is something that we probably won't know until next year. It takes time for economists to sift through the data and figure out exactly what's happening. It takes time to reflect back on situations like these and come to any meaningful conclusion, right? So between those two articles, there is no real contradiction. right? They're simply pointing to different factors, and we won't get the final answer until probably, I mean, the data will come in starting around September, but there will need to be continual assessment and analysis. So we'll probably know next year exactly what's happening. So that's how to resolve the contradiction between these two articles. And I hope that was helpful. You know, there's a lot going on in the market right now, right? So I'll probably have to do more live streams more often than I'd originally planned. So I may have mentioned I stream every Wednesday night and Sunday afternoons at Pacific Standard Time. But when the occasion rises, for example, like today, I'm going to do extra bonus live streams because there's so much stuff going on in the news, and I want to help you to resolve contradictions like this and conflicting signals and help put things in the proper perspective. So I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next stream.